Hi, you are listening to Blooming with myself, Laura. I am an ex-Mormon and a lesbian. This is episode 3, which I'm calling Misinformed by Mormonism Leads to a Bad Marriage. This podcast explores my story of discovering that I was gay at the age of 46 after coming out of a controlling religion. The podcast is for late blooming queer people, their spouses, family, and anyone seeking better understanding of themselves and humanity. It's also for any other Mormon seeking stories to help them heal from their religious trauma. And lastly, this podcast is meant to be heard sequentially. So if you're discovering this somewhere in a middle episode, go back and listen to the early episodes so that you're all caught up. All right. Before I go on, I want to make another disclaimer. So last episode, I talked about Mormon underwear. And anytime I talk about Mormon underwear, I get a bunch of questions. So I'm going to clarify some stuff before I say anything else. So Mormon underwear is called the garment or garments. And Mormons are taught that the garment is sacred. So if you want to use Google or TikTok to learn about what I mean by Mormon underwear, the information is literally in your hands. You just got to Google Mormon garments or Mormon underwear. And my personal opinion is that the garment is designed to be another way to control us. And I'm not a fan. But I'm not planning on using this platform as a way to shame those who still wear the Mormon garments, because it's part of how they're taught to worship. And that includes people that I love who wear them. And I never want to create any type of non-safe space here on my podcast. So you can find it if you want to. And it is not your typical looking underwear, but I don't want to create a place where people who are wearing them are being criticized. Now, like I said in the first episode, if we want to criticize the people who designed the system to make us wear it, then I'm super happy to do that. Okay, but our topic at hand today is that by the end of this episode, you will know why I married and stayed married to a man who was completely unsuited to be my partner. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time telling you that he was a terrible person, because he's not. He's not a bad dude. He's my children's father. And he, in many ways, was just also a victim of the controlling dogma that we were inside. And he's just not the person that I would have yoked myself to if I had known better who I was and what my life choices actually were. Okay. So we're looking at the system and how the system hurt me, but we're not looking at criticizing my ex-husband. Okay. So after I went to high school, then I went to BYU, which in many circles is also called BYWoo. And the reason is because the culture there is extremely marriage oriented. And in the last episode, I was telling you about how there was a lot of pressure on me as a girl to be alluring, but not too alluring. And that pressure got a lot worse at BYWoo. I mean, the pretty girls were literally everywhere. And even at the college, I told you about the ratio problem. There were more women than men at BYWoo. And I mean, I don't remember when in America more women started going to college than men, but that's definitely what was happening. Plus, obviously, we always have that discrepancy between the men who want to stay in the religion and the women. So many pretty girls. And I was just still this awkward, huge boobed, poorly dressed, awkward person. I was a fun person, but I wasn't dateable. I didn't believe I was dateable. And I didn't have barely any dates my freshman year. And my hope had been that I would get swept up in love my freshman year and just get married and quit school and have some babies. So it didn't happen my freshman year, just kind of disappointed about. And I spent a lot of time feeling bad about myself that year. Then I came back for my sophomore year, and finally, halfway through sophomore year, somebody started paying attention to me. Yay, the crowd goes wild. He was a little bit older for not having left on his mission yet. So he was my age, but he needed to go on his mission. So he left most of the way through my sophomore year. And I was just convinced that we were deeply in love. Like that's what I believed. And that, we were going to write until he got home, and then we would get married within like 2 weeks of him coming home or something silly like that. And then we would get to have sex and it'd be amazing. And he would go to school and I would do whatever we needed to help him through school. Maybe he'd be a doctor, we'll see, kind of thing. So I finished my sophomore year and I was like, since he's a little older than your typical guy who leaves, usually they leave when they're 19. I think he was like 20 and a half. That means I'm almost 21. And that's how old girls needed to be back then. They've changed the ages since then. But back then, the girls needed to be 21 to go on a mission. Honestly, so if you're not Mormon, secretly, I think the reason was they were hoping the girls would just go ahead and get married and not go on a mission. They wanted the boys to go. They did not want the girls to go. They want the girls to just stay home, do the things that I talked about in the last episode. So he left, and then I was like, well, maybe I should go, because I would only get home 6 months after him. And that started to appeal to me. Plus, at BYU, I was still just kind of always feeling bad about myself. I realize now, looking back on it, that a lot of that was internal. It was what I was telling myself. But they really did have nicer clothes than me. and I was okay, but I did not measure up. There were other girls who had dates like every week, and nobody was asking me out except for that one boy. So I was holding on to that, right? So anyway, I decided to go on a mission, and I got sent to Hawaii. I left when I turned 21, just a few weeks after 21, and Hawaii was amazing to me. And honestly, what a wonderful place. Now, I will say, looking back, I'm very sorry about the cultural appropriation, not co-appropriation. Oh, shoot, what's that word? Colonialism. That's the word I needed. I'm sorry about the colonialism in which I participated there. I literally taught Native Hawaiians to convert to Mormonism, and looking at that, I'm like, oh, Laura, what were you doing? But I had a wonderful time. I learned on my mission that I could work really hard and still have a great day, and that I really, really liked helping people. Plus, I got exposed to many different cultures because I was a visitor center missionary, which meant that I did tours. And our tours would start at the Polynesian Cultural Center, which is right up the road, also owned by the Mormon Church. We'd take them on a tram to the visitor center of the temple, show them a statue of Jesus, trying to get them to feel some warm fuzzies, and then invite them to have missionaries teach them more when they got home. And I did that for 18 months, and I even learned how to give the tour in different languages and to get to know people from all different religious backgrounds, which definitely kind of caused a little cognitive dissonance for me, just enough to just be like, gosh, do I really think that we Mormons have the monopoly on truth here? I don't know. But I had a great time on my mission. And 6 months before I came home, my boyfriend at the time, isn't it funny how all these phases of my life are framed by who I was supposedly in love with? All you lesbians listening to this are just laughing, going, yeah, it's a man's world. But my boyfriend at the time, he did write to me during his mission. And then when he got home, he wrote to me a few times, and then he sort of went silent. And this whole time, I was pretty ignorant in the ways of boys. I did not realize that I was being ghosted. I just thought he was really busy. And, every now and then I'd get a letter from him. We weren't allowed to call. That's part of, I probably should have mentioned that. Missionaries can only write letters. Now they can do emails, but back then it was only letters, and it was only once a week that you could read or write your letters. So I got home from my mission, and I really expected to see him at the airport with open arms, ready to embrace me, and we would start our life together. But what happened instead was that he wasn't there, and he didn't call. I didn't have any letters or flowers from him. So finally, most of the way through the next day, I called him. And that's when I found out that he had started dating when he got home, and that he had gotten another girl pregnant, and he was getting ready to be married to this other girl. And oh my goodness, you would have thought that I had gotten cancer or that my parents were dying. I mean, I was devastated, and I cried for days, even though this is a boy that I really only knew for like 3 or 4 months. And then we wrote to each other, and he was okay at writing letters, but he wasn't great. It's not like we really got to know each other during those letters. But it was the idea. It was the idea that I thought I was safe from becoming an old maid, that my life was planned, that I was safe from that fear that I had had my whole life growing up. And all of a sudden that fear was facing me straight up. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm 22 and nobody has chosen me to get married. And I was like picturing a sexless life and, no babies to be born. And I didn't know what was going to become of me. And I pictured the older women that I knew in the church who had never been married. And I was like, that's going to be me. So anyway, I was devastated, but I did have one really good thing that happened to me, which was that I got an offer from the dentist that I worked for prior to my mission. He wrote to me right before I got home, and he offered me a job and said that he would teach me to be a dental assistant. And usually you have to go to school for that unless you can find a dentist who wants to train you to do it. So I had a job. I didn't want to go back to BYU, you guys. I was afraid of feeling that rejected, ugly, old maid feeling. I cannot emphasize enough to you how much this fear of being unwanted dominated my personal decisions, my life at this point. But at least I had this job. And so I started working as a dental assistant, and I thought dentistry was fascinating. Like the first time that I watched the dentist, we call it cut a class 2, but it was taking out cavities. I was like, this is amazing. This is my future. And I jumped right into it. I learned all kinds of clinical things very quickly and had a really fun time doing it. And I had so much fun, and I didn't have any prospects and pretty much thought of myself as a dried up raisin at 22. So I approached the dentist, who was a Mormon man, and I said, I was thinking maybe I could go to dental school. And do you guys want to guess what his reaction to that was? It was kind of like, well, dental school is pretty hard, with a big emphasis on this is awfully difficult. I don't really know any dental assistants who can go from that to being a dentist. So I kind of shrugged that off a bit. I knew from my days at BYU, which is a hard school to get into, especially now, but even back then it was difficult to get accepted. And my roommates were always mad at me because I didn't really have to spend very much time studying. I knew I was a good student. So I started kind of poking around to see what it would take for me to go to dental school. But in the meantime, at church, I met a boy who was available and was my age. He was converted to Mormonism. We'd actually gone to high school together, but I'd never spoken to him because he ran in the like athlete circles and I ran in the nerd orchestra AP classes circles. So we had never really spoken, but he was kind of cute. He had a nice smile, and he liked me. What a relief. Oh my goodness, I'm saved. I don't have to be an old sexless maid anymore. So we actually started dating, and we had a whirlwind courtship and romance that all together, I don't even know if it was 6 months. I'm pretty sure it was about 5 months from the time we started dating until our wedding day. So this is a boy that I hardly knew. And I will tell you, especially for those who are new to Mormon culture, it's very common. And that is because Mormons believe that keeping your chastity, keeping your purity is more important than choosing the right partner. In fact, there is a saying that goes around, is actually said by one of our prophets, meaning the president of the church, but we call him a prophet because members of the Mormon church literally believe that the prophet speaks to God. And he said during a BYU devotional once in, like, I don't know, the 60s or the 70s, that any two good Mormons could make a good marriage work. It was just a matter of that the church set the framework out for the good marriage, and all you had to do was kind of like plug and play. Like marriage is kind of modular. You just take this shelf and this shelf and you put them together, and voila, you have a marriage. That's all it takes. And so with this belief and the importance on not bumping uglies together before you get married. I mean, remember, if you bump uglies, then that's a sin that's next to murder in seriousness, right? So everybody takes that really seriously. And of course, you want to get married in the temple, which is supposed to be a superior way to get married, because then you're getting married for eternity. Like you're going to be married in heaven too. Whereas Mormons believe that if you get married outside of the temple, then you're only married until you die. So because of those reasons, and because, we were excited to have each other, I thought it was love. I'm sure it was some sort of love. We went ahead and we got married, even though we hardly knew each other. And within a year of our marriage, we were parents. So I hadn't finished anything. I mean, he was just starting college, happily with the GI Bill, because he had been a Marine. So we had that going for us. And I hadn't finished anything. I did, after she was born, my first daughter, I started taking 2 classes at a time at the community college. But we didn't have any employable skills between the two of us. We lived in a trailer, and our food budget and everything was diminutive, but we did it. And actually, after my oldest was born, I stayed home. So he became the sole provider of our family, plus he was going to school full time as well. And then I did my part-time school thing, which was great. I loved going to school, but I did give up on my dream to go to dental school. After I got married and had my first baby, I was like, well, now my life's path is set before me. And anyway, going to professional school as a mom is a little bit naughty. Like if I do that, then I'm taking my precious time and my precious attention away from my child, and I'm putting it selfishly upon myself. And that's truly what I believe. And so I switched in school from science to, I can't remember, I was thinking maybe I want to be a teacher or maybe a sign language interpreter. I wasn't really sure, but it was 2 classes at a time, just kind of finishing up my associate's degree. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot a whole section where I was going to tell you about something. So I'm going to rewind for a minute, and I apologize for that. This podcast is kind of a experiment. I'm like throwing spaghetti against the wall just to see if people are interested in the story. So I don't have an editor. I'm just going to doing this by myself. And I really want to tell you about what I forgot to. So rewind. And I am going to tell you about some of the misogyny that I encountered on my mission. I totally forgot about this, and it's really, really important. You know, missions are set up highly structured. Just like the Mormon church, there's a hierarchy. Okay. There's a hierarchy, there's rules and regulations, there's certain ways to do everything. And it's all set up in a rule book. And one of the things that I noticed right away on the mission is that as a woman, there is always at least one layer of man in charge of you. And for the visitor center missionaries, we usually had 2 or 3, depending on which district we were in. So we would have our district leader and our zone leader, and then we would have the head of the visitor center, which was usually an older man who was married and on a Mormon mission, because sometimes as retired couples they go on. So we had like a bishop kind of figurehead who was in charge of the visitor center as a whole, and then the mission president as well. And a lot of times on our mission, the district leaders, what's over like, I don't know, 3 or 4 companionships. Oh, companionships are pairs. You always have an assigned partner on your mission. So when I say 2 or 3 companionships, it's 2 or 3 or 4 pairs of sister missionaries. You get your assigned partner, and then the district leader is over all those. Usually on missions, district leaders are men. But on our mission, since we had so many girls, because only girls could be visitor center missionaries. I don't know why, but we were all girls, and except for the couples. And so the district leaders were girls too. And I was a district leader at one point. So that's kind of a unique thing for a sister missionary. But we had all these layers and layers of men who were in charge of us. And the boys who were the district and the zone leaders, remember, they're 2 years younger than us. So they're like barely out of childhood and getting a little closer to manhood. Of course, typically, you know, women mature faster than men, plus we're older. So we're like rolling our eyes at these boys who are in charge of us, making sure we're getting the numbers right. We're calling them every night to tell them what we did, how we spent our days, and if we obeyed the rules and stuff like that. And it's just like, I look back at that and I'm like, I can't believe they put the little boys in charge of all these women who were working so hard and being so obedient. Another thing that the mission did that was really kind of annoying was they would make these misogynistic rules around the normal rules. Like, so for example, we liked working out. We were trying to stay pretty and attractive. I mean, it's good for you anyway, but like I was working out because I wanted to stay thin for my wedding night. But we found out that if we wanted to work out in the little town where we were living, we couldn't wear shorts. It had to be sweatpants. And this is in Hawaii, folks. So we're talking about like 80 degrees and muggy at 7 a.m. in the morning. Well, 7 a.m. is a little too late, 6:30, 6 o'clock. And those were some sweaty workouts. And what was wrong with those shorts? Like, were we gonna seduce somebody, or were the knees gonna make somebody get a hard on? I don't know. We weren't working out with the boys, and we were going to aerobics class, but they put a stop to that because they were playing secular music in the class. That wasn't allowed. And when we had a convert to get baptized, since there was a rule that you couldn't swim as missionaries, of course, in Hawaii, there had to be an extra rule. There were so many extra rules in Hawaii. So, and one of those rules was that you couldn't put your toes on the sand. And the baptisms were in the ocean because there was a water shortage there. They wanted to conserve the water, which I love. But that means that the boys who held the priesthood would take the converts out on the ocean, and we're standing way back where the sand stops, just waving at them. The people we taught can't hear it, can't see it, and it's just, you know, the boys are the ones who get to do the actual baptizing, right? And the saddest part was, and this one makes me real sad for like past me, especially looking at my life now. I'm like, really, Laura, that's what you aspired to? My greatest aspiration, my biggest goal when I was on my mission was that someday I could marry a man who would someday be a mission president. So the mission president is over the entire mission. So there was one man and his wife was with him there who was of retirement age, and he was over the whole mission. And I thought of him as a spiritual God. I thought he was amazing, and his wife too, you know. And this is what my big goal was. I was like, I just want to be spiritual enough that I can be worthy of marrying a man who will someday be a mission president. And I'm like, really, Laura? That's what you wanted? Look at your life. I wish I could have shown her all the things that we were going to do and let her, aspire a little higher. But this was the environment that we were in, where this is something that was valued. Oh, a wife of a mission president. That's amazing. Okay, so going back to where we were. Thank you for taking that little jaunt with me. And I'm going back to, I was afraid that I was going to be an old maid. So I didn't go back to BYU. And so I worked for the dentist. And then I met a boy who is now my ex-husband. And we had one daughter after we'd been married for a little less than a year. And then slightly less than 2 years after that, we had another daughter. So we just were having babies, even though we were completely unprepared to provide for the babies. But this was, again, very cultural. We were told by the leaders of the church that we should not wait to have babies until we were comfortable materially, like financially speaking. They encouraged you to just go ahead and make the babies right away. And in fact, my mom told me when I got married, she said, well, if you're old enough to get married, then you're old enough to have babies. I'd grown up in young women that's the church for girls 12 to 18. So that would have been 80s and 90s. And all the lessons were like, birth control is of the devil. You are not supposed to use birth control. If God wants you to have a baby, then you let that baby come. And so we let 2 babies come. And then, my husband had a lot on his plate. He was in the ROTC. He had a ROTC scholarship. His classes were getting harder because he wasn't an underclassman anymore. And he was the sole provider for our family. So I offered to help him by getting a part-time job. And of course, the best job that I could find was a dental practice. I got hired by another dentist to work as a dental assistant, and I just slipped right into being an assistant. I was never that good of a dental assistant, by the way. I'm not detail oriented enough to keep track of all those little things. Dental assistants are amazing. I was okay. And I was working, and I was sitting with the dentist, holding the suction and the water. I'm sure you've each seen a dental assistant doing that. And I was watching him, and I had one of the most powerful epiphanies of my life. Here I was with a 2-year-old and like a 3-month-old. And I was like, I can do what he's doing. I know deep in my bones that I can do this. I had forgotten that I wanted to be a dentist, but now I know I can. And I already know I'm a good student. And these babies are already with me. I'm already used to being poor. I'm going to do it. And I went home and I said, hey, husband, do you mind? Can I go to dental school? And he was a convert to Mormonism. He was not nearly as culturally Mormon. And to his credit, he said, knock yourself out, Laura. Let's do it. You enroll in those classes and you do it. So I immediately, because it was early January, I immediately got onto my community college's website and I unenrolled from my general ed, and I did math, biology, and chemistry. And then I went to my sister, who's 10 years younger than I am. She was a junior in high school. I said, could you babysit for me on this evening, and on Saturday mornings? I took care of all of it. And she said yes. And so all of a sudden I was on my journey to becoming a dentist. You can believe that, with those 2 tiny children. And once I enrolled in those classes, you could not stop me. Every question that I didn't understand, my hand was in the air. Every math problem that I didn't get right, I was following up on. Over the summer, I took extra chemistry and organic chemistry. And within like a year and a half, I was ready to take the dental admissions test. The advisor at the school said, "You're not ready yet. I think you should wait a year." And I said, "I'm just going to try." Like literally every night after I put the kids to bed, I would crack open those books. I was teaching myself ahead of the content from the dental admissions test books just to be ready. And I took that test and I got good enough scores that I got my ass into dental school. So when I started, the kids were, I think they were almost 4 and almost 2 when they started. And I was like, this was, I'll get into this and then I'll close for this episode. This was an act of cultural rebellion for me. So like when I said to my bishop, who's the head of the congregation, "I'm going to go to dental school," he kind of looked at me like, you're going to what? And are you sure? Or are you going to be a hygienist? Or like, what about your kids? And so I had to, over and over again, I had to re-explain to people that no, I was going to be a dentist. I was going to be a doctor of dental surgery. And in fact, with these 2 small children and getting admitted to this difficult program and difficult to get admitted program at Iowa, which was happily only 30 minutes from where we lived. So I didn't even have to relocate the family. My grandma got wind of this and she wrote me a big old letter with like copies of quotes from some of the top leaders, the ones who wouldn't be comfortable listening to my podcast, of the Mormon church. And she said, "Laura, listen, we already know you're smart. You don't have to prove it to anyone, but you will be blessed to give this up. This is not right for your family. If you become a dentist, your husband will not be the leader of your family anymore. So I implore you to give up on dental school." This is the kind of family support that I got. You would think a grandma would be like, "Well, my granddaughter is in dental school. She's going to be a dentist." But no, she was upset because she was worried about my spiritual well-being, I guess. By the way, this is the same woman, bless her soul, who passed on the generational trauma from her mom to my mom, and then my mom to me. There's some stuff we got to work out there. And I think about that too, like, what did I pass on to my kids? But anyway, I got accepted. And so this is where I'm going to close this episode, is that I went to dental school starting with my 2 small children. And then during my sophomore year, I had a third. Of course I did, because I was feeling guilty about the fact that I was putting something ahead of my motherhood. So this was a way for me to feel like I was putting motherhood first. I was like, well, if I have another baby, then nobody can argue. I'm putting motherhood first. And so that's what we did. So this is where I'm going to close for now. At this point in my journey, I'm still a believing Mormon. I'm married and I'm going to dental school. Okay, this was fun. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.